and come back to the fact that if you're human, you're going to experience life, and some experiences in your life are going to be very adverse, and you're going to have a response to that with your mind, like I've been explaining. You'll think, feel, choose through that, and you will build a trauma response into your brain because your brain's trying to survive.
Welcome to the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. Now, here's your host, author, speaker, entrepreneur, Cornell Jermaine.
Thank you for joining me. I have a special guest with me. She is a neuroscientist, mental health and mind expert, best-selling author, researcher, and activist. Please help me welcome on the subject of cleaning up your mental mess, Dr. Caroline Leaf. Dr. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you. It's nice to see you again. It's been a couple of years.
Yes. I have to ask, and I've been doing this for my interviews ever since we've had this global outbreak. So before we get into the content, I just always like to ask my guests, how have the family and everyone been doing in your life amid this global crisis we're in?
You know, it's been, as you say, a global crisis. It's been a time where there's been the positive and the negative, like in everything. And on the positive side, we've had so much more family time together because I normally travel 70% of the month with the work that I do. And we've been at home and working from home as like everyone else. So that's been amazing. A lot more family bonding, a lot more deep thinking. I managed to get a lot of work done. So we've actually, benefited a lot. I was running clinical trials and I managed to finish those. And so I had more time to do a lot of that sort of thing. On the other side, it's been very concerning to have to. I mean, it's the first time in history that all of humanity have faced the same global enemy. So it's a very interesting time, but it's also very positive in that people have slowed down. And we've been in the era of hurry sickness, and we've now got back to some deep thinking, which is really in my world, in my domain. So I'm happy about that, and I'm happy that people are questioning a lot of stuff. So I think there's good and bad. Not easy for the youth, not easy for those that, like my one daughter, she graduated it was her birthday and she graduated the week of lockdown, so she couldn't have all the normal experiences and, job opportunities. And so I think for that age group and, your sort of 18, every age group, but it's been extremely hard for the 18 to 25-year-old age group with getting out in the workforce and socializing. And, that's been very tough.
Yeah, so tough. But we're pushing through, and hopefully with all of the changes we're seeing in the near future with the vaccine. Hopefully
exactly.
We'll see a brighter
exciting.
Future.
Yeah.
Yes. You have an extensive resume, and I can't even go into detail on how much you've done in both ministry and the science arena. But tell us, how did your professional journey start? You're a neuroscientist. You have several degrees and credentials under your belt. How did your journey in that profession start?
I've always had a fascination with the mind and the brain, and wanted to study the difference between the two, and then how memory forms and how thoughts formed, and can we control our mind? And in science, the hard question is considered to be, what is mind? Mind is considered the hard question. And I thought, well, I don't think that's actually a hard question, because mind is basically not such an elusive concept, because we're using our mind right now as we're talking. You're always using your mind. If you're human, you're using your mind. So I wanted to study that, and I love the brain, to understand how the mind-brain connection worked. So I got into this years ago. It's 38 years ago now that I got into doing the degrees I did to try and get into this world and I nearly became a neurosurgeon. Then I decided to move more into neuroscience and neuropsychology and quantum physics and all that kind of stuff, and pursue different degrees and do clinical trials. I just finished a set of clinical trials, which I've summarized and put into this book, The Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And I worked in South Africa for many years. I was born in Zimbabwe, grew up in South Africa, and I did a lot of my initial research in that era when it was in the 80s. First of all, in the 80s, we were told that the brain couldn't change. And I did some of the first work in neuroplasticity, which showed, because I didn't believe that the brain couldn't change. I believed that as humans, we can grow and change, and that change will be reflected in the brain. So I did some of the first work against a lot of advice from my professors to show that if your brain is damaged, and if you use your mind, you can you can change the brain. And I showed that you could. I showed you can expect a 35 to 75% improvement in how you function. So I continued in that vein of research. And by the mid-90s, it was accepted that the brain is neuroplastic and you can change. And, then we grew and then we went backwards where we started thinking, it's all about brain and forgot all about mind. And so I've pursued a career where I've tried to help people understand mind and the mind-brain connection. And I've done all my research with real people. I don't work in labs. I work in the field. So I work with humans in life, which I believe is much more honest and open, and you'll get a real reflection of humanity. So I've worked in like Rwanda and trauma victims. I worked through South Africa through the terrible apartheid system, the transition, the post-apartheid system. So I worked in all the areas in education and mental health and that kind of thing. So I've had a very interesting career. And now basically this is my 19th book. I now write about this, teach around the world and try and help people manage their mind. So that's a broad, big picture.
Yes. You brought up that subject of the mind and brain. And as a believer, we're taught that the mind is, I guess, our soul, if you will. Break that down as much as you can as it pertains to our lives as Christians. What role does the mind play in our belief system?
Well, the first part of that answer is very easy, and that is that we can go 3 weeks without food. We can go 3 days without water. We can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but we don't even go 3 seconds without thinking, without using our mind. So our mind is always in action. If you're dead, your brain and body are physically going to die. So the thing that's keeping your brain and mind alive is your mind. So your mind is not the same as your brain. So it's easier if you see a visual. So here is a brain. Okay, so you are not your brain. You've got your brain in your body. So your brain and your body are the physical part of you. And that's around about, if we have to give an estimate, somewhere in the region of about 1% of who you are. So your brain and your body are about 1% of who you are. They are responders. We use our brain and our body to express our mind. So our mind can be seen as the spiritual part of us. The mind is... Let's take 2 parts. The mind is you. It's how you uniquely think and feel and choose. So it's 3 things. Mind is always in action, and mind is thinking, feeling, choosing. See how my fingers I'm holding together? If you think, you will feel. When you think and feel, you will choose. Those 2 are always happening. And that is mind. And that it happens on different levels. We've got our deepest part of us, our non-conscious mind, which is almost like the spiritual part of mind, which is huge quantum. It has its inner wisdom, the inner core that is this wired for love, perfect nature. And then on the outside of that is like a whole forest of experiences and trees of experience, sort of thoughts. If you think of a thought like a tree, it's okay, let me say this a little bit more simplistically. The mind, the biggest part of the mind is the spiritual part, and that is the non-conscious mind that operates 24/7. It's huge, dynamic, has trillions of memories in it. Memories are inside thoughts. So memories are all the little branches inside of a tree. So thoughts look like trees made of memories. It's always active 24/7. It's connected to wisdom. It's connected to God or godness, however you want to say it. That is always operating. Then, and the inner core of that, if you imagine that as being a huge forest with all these thought trees, the inner core is this huge middle part that's this beautiful wise forest, that this green, beautiful, healthy, and then on the outside is all the experiences. That's the non-conscious mind. That's the biggest part of our mind. Then you have the subconscious mind, which is when you, as I'm talking now, I'm reminding you of all kinds of things, all kinds of thoughts are popping into your head. That is the subconscious mind, that the thoughts are moving from the non-conscious through the subconscious into your conscious mind. The conscious mind is what you are using to communicate with me. So the conscious mind is only awake when you're awake. So when you go to sleep, the conscious mind goes to sleep, but the non-conscious and subconscious never go to sleep. They are 24/7, they are operating. So the core of so mind is 99% of who you are, brain and body. 1% of who you are. Mind moves through brain and body respond to mind. So how we manage our mind is vital, because we consciously need to tap into the depths of the inner wisdom of the non-conscious mind. So conscious mind, when we're awake, we need to be drawing on and listening to the subconscious, because the subconscious is giving us messages of what we're thinking right, what we're doing wrong. It's got all these messages, and when we choose to use our conscious mind to tune into the subconscious, we will then tune into our wisdom part of our mind, which is connected with Godness, with God, with wisdom. So we've got wisdom and we connected with wisdom, but we can often block wisdom, because if you imagine that very big, huge green forest and the middle part being this beautiful, dark green, healthy, that's our wisdom mind. But on the outside are lighter green trees, and in between the lighter green trees are these toxic trees. And all the trees, every single tree represents a thought. Every tree is a thought, and every thought is built in response to every experience. So we have trillions of experiences in our life, and every experience is built into this forest. And it's either going to be a positive experience with a positive response, and we build a healthy tree, or it's a negative experience, adverse experience, and we have an adverse response, and we build a toxic tree. So like an argument, or what's going on in racism and politics, and an argument with someone, and COVID and financial life. You open your eyes in the morning, and your mind is in action. You're responding to the email, the text, the conversation, the argument, the business, the pressure, each of that you respond to those experiences with your mind, your thinking, feeling, and choosing. So consciously you process with thinking, feeling, choosing. And as you're processing, you're drawing on you're listening to the subconscious mind, drawing on what's in the non-conscious mind. So as we're having this conversation now, you've got all kinds of thoughts that are popping up from the non-conscious to the conscious, and we use these to help us process the next moment and build more trees into our non-conscious mind. And not only do we build thoughts into the mind, into this forest, which is this gravitational force. Quantum physicists have won Nobel Prizes explaining this quantum force of mind. We also have our physical brain. So those trees are also built in the brain. So that forest I've described in the non-conscious, subconscious, and conscious mind is also built into the brain. So it's in this another place. Second place is in the brain. So everything you experience, every thought you have that is made of memories is in the mind, this forest, this gravitational field, the spiritual force. And it's also in the brain, physically, made little trees made of protein. So you have these tree-like structures in your brain as well, healthy and toxic ones. And also, every single thought with its memories is built into every cell of your brain and your body. And your brain and your body is made of 37 to 100 trillion cells. So the thoughts and the experiences that we have, that we process through our mind, we build into our mind and brain and body. And that's why we're so complex. So when we recall something, we're recalling it from the non-conscious through the conscious into the conscious mind. So from that quantum forest, if you want to call it that, and it's coming out of our brain and it's coming out of our body. So that's why we experience things so holistically, physically, emotionally, lots of information, and that can be a mess. If those trees, if the trees look like this, that's a mess. So what we can do, which is essentially what I teach people to do, what I'm teaching them in this book, which is my 19th book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, is teaching people how to consciously access that wise part of our unconscious mind, that made in God's image part of our mind, that central forest where the wisdom resides, that's connected directly to the spirit of wisdom, Godness, God, whatever you love, whatever you want to call it, and use that wisdom to see the toxic trees on the outside part of the forest, pull them up and fix them, embrace, process, and reconceptualize them. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess is teaching people to do. That's a long answer.
It's
Maybe
so
you
good,
want to unpack it.
It's so good. You talked about how as you were talking, thoughts were coming up, and they were in my head. And I have to ask, you talked about us when we go to sleep, the conscious mind is at rest.
Yes.
How do you explain dreams then when it comes to us being unconscious?
Okay, so when we go to sleep, we're actually not unconscious. Unconscious means that you've been either knocked out or anesthetized. So unconscious is a different state that we go into. So when we go to sleep, our sleep state means the conscious mind switches off, but the non-conscious mind, that massive forest and its little bridge, the subconscious mind, those are still awake. So dreams are basically us doing housekeeping. So as you go to sleep at night, the thoughts that you've built during the day, because during the day you're experiencing life, and as you're experiencing life, you're experiencing how through your mind. So you're thinking, feeling, choosing, thinking, feeling, choosing. As you think, feel, and choose in response to email, text, business, this conversation, all the time you're responding, you're building the responses into these thoughts, into your brain and into your mind, into that forest that I spoke about. Okay. So then when you go to sleep at night, you sort out what you've built. So at nighttime, when you go to sleep and the conscious mind switches off, things reverse inside the brain, and the mind comes in like a vacuum cleaner and cleaning up, and there's all this housekeeping going on and regenerating so that you can prepare yourself for the next day. Because the mind is very big, very active. So the brain gets very tired. So when dreams are basically the result of housekeeping, it's a result. And as there's this sweep of energy through trying to sort out toxic thoughts, trying to clean up the mental mess as you're sleeping, that stimulates dreams. Dreams are trying to process the experiences of the day linked to previous memories, because all these trees are intertwined. So, you built something today, but there's something about that thought that connected to some other thought that connected to some other thought, because there's a root system. And that what the experience you had today is triggers a response, a thought or a memory from another time. So at nighttime, all these little connections are made, and this creates tremendous turmoil in the forest. It creates an imbalance of energy. So it's like this whooshing whirlwind in the forest, and that is not healthy for the brain. It's not survival. It's not operating in love, whatever you want to say. And also scientifically in the brain, we see that this toxic thought causes brain damage. So when you go to sleep at night, it upsets the energy levels, it upsets the neurochemistry. So at nighttime when you sleep, your brain is designed with your mind to clean up these things, to try and make as much sense. If there's a lot of suppressed trauma, for example, that can come out as repeated nightmares. So nightmares are evidence that we have trauma that is undealt with, things that we just have not processed properly, that have gripped us in a state of fear. And your brain is trying to get rid of them, like it gets rid of a virus, like it gets rid of trying to get rid of the COVID virus with the immune response. Our brain automatically also will treat this like COVID, like any kind of virus. It sends out immune factors. So as you're sleeping, it's trying to get rid of this and clean it up. So the brain's trying to clean it up physically, the mind's cleaning it up on a quantum level, and the DNA, there's a cleanup going on in your body. So there's a lot of stuff happening at night, which is why we dream. And so that's why, so in my book, in the second part of the book, I give the practical system that I've developed to help you to consciously and deliberately, when you're awake, learn how to tap into that wisdom part, that forest in the middle, so that you can find these, pull them up and clean them up, embrace them, process them, and reconceptualize them. And that's done over time, because it takes, you're not going to heal trauma in one day. We see that to identify and to embrace, process, and reconceptualize, it's daily work over 63 days. So it takes 63 days to build a habit and to break down a toxic habit, not 21. So different things happen. You've got various different not trigger points, days where specific things happen in the brain. So like a day 7, day 14, day 21, etc. But if you're doing trauma work, what you want to do is consciously learn how to access the wisdom part, and you use that wisdom mind to fix the crazy mind and the trauma mind and the toxic habits. So using mind to fix mind, and that then changes brain. So you're directing the neuroplastic changes in the brain. And that takes you around about 15 to 45 minutes daily over 65 days to identify, to work on a toxic thought or a toxic habit, a trauma, or whatever it may be. But you can also, as I mentioned at the beginning, you don't even go 3 seconds without using your mind. So our mind is always working. So in the moment, like, let's say, for example, you go from this podcast and you get a terrible text about something that's happened, or someone sends you some negative comment, or you suddenly have a lot of work pressure, or something happens. Those are the in the moment things. You also have to be able to manage your mind in the moment so that you have wisdom. And if we don't manage what we are receiving, if we don't know how to manage our mind in the moment, what will also happen is that these toxic reactions from the past can block our wisdom, and we kind of respond automatically, because that situation will trigger something similar in your brain that you've experienced in the past, and some toxic reaction will come up, and then we react, we don't respond, and that creates chaos in our brain, a mess in our brain, a mess in the response, a mess in the relationship, or whatever it may be, and we don't have the best solution. So to get the best solution, the 5-step process I've developed, you can also use in the moment. And the 5-step process I've developed is called a Neurocycle. a Neurocycle, neuro meaning brain cycle. So I've developed over 38 years and researched and just updated my research. And I've put some of the simple summary of the clinical trials in the first half of the book. But I explain basically how anyone, if you're human, you can do this. You can manage your mind. You don't have to wait for a professional to manage your mind for you. You have your mind. Your mind is malleable. You can learn to use these 5 steps to manage the in the moment stuff, the bullying, the scary school teacher, the scary work, what's going on politically, everything in the moment. Plus you can work on the traumas, the toxic habits. Plus you can use the 5 steps to help you build new habits, like new exercise habits or new better ways of responding to maybe your spouse or whatever. So it's basically, in a nutshell, when I talk about cleaning up the mental mess, I'm talking about teaching people how to use their mind consciously to access the wisdom of the non-conscious mind, to fix up the mess in the non-conscious mind, the crazy parts, so that we can actually manage our day-to-day moments more effectively and manage the damage from trauma and toxic habits.
You know, amid this crisis, change has been inevitable for many of us. And you talked about your early studies in the 80s and 90s, how the mind was at one point thought not to be able to change, and now you discovered it can. Why is change so hard for us as humans?
Such a good question. And it's something that so many people do ask. And change is certain because we're never the same. So if we understand that change, what change is, it makes it easier to manage. Why does everyone fear change? Because when change is happening, we feel out of control. So what we have to do is, and as soon as we feel out of control, we feel like we're disempowered. We feel like we're losing our autonomy. So a lot of the work that I've done is to help people to recognize and embrace change, because as being a normal part of life, and to develop more of a possibilities type mindset. And it begins with recognizing something very simple, and that's that the brain never is the same. Your brain is plastic, literally. And we call neuroplasticity. Neuro means brain, plastic means to change. Your brain is designed to change constantly. So it's always changing. Your brain's not the same now as it was 10 minutes ago, as it was yesterday. It will never be the same. We see that the brain is constantly changing because of the fact that every moment of every day we're experiencing something new. So yes, there's certain patterns that we've developed that are automatic patterns, automatic thoughts that we've built into our tree, good and bad ones. And yes, there's certain parts of our core personality that we sort of have a view of life in a certain way and certain things we've learned. But even those change, even those evolve. Every time you get in a car, yes, you've learned to drive a car years ago, but you get in your car, you pull up the thought tree that is all your experience of learning to drive a car, and you add another branch on. So here you drive today, you grow another branch. So even your driving memory changes every day. Every time you eat, it's a new experience. To help us with change, we need to recognize we are change. It's the core of who we are as humans. And when we see it that way, we shift our mindset and we see, hey, I can make change work for me and not against me. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because I've discussed this quite extensively in the book, because it is the fear of change that blocks people. But if you accept change and see, oh, this is actually natural, it's happening in my brain, I have control over that. I can direct the neuroplasticity. I can consciously control all the crazy that I feel, all the rumination, toxic habits, none of those, even the past, even the traumas of the past that we feel that have stolen from us, and that we grieve over the stolen times of maybe someone who's abused or bullied or been in a bad marriage or whatever they've gone through. Even those don't have to control you. The past doesn't have to control you. So by seeing why doesn't it? Because we can change. Because we can change how the past plays out into our future. We can change how we choose to respond in the next moment. We can't control events and circumstances, but we can control how we respond to them. So we can control our responses to the events and circumstances. And the only way we can control our responses is because we embrace change. Change is an organic process that actually helps us grow and repair messes and move forward. So if we shift our mindset to getting excited about change, then we look at it differently. You have a whole different view. You put on a different set of glasses and you see things differently. It's like if you took off your glasses now, you wouldn't see as clearly, but you put them on. And that's what I'm trying to show people, that when you manage your mind, you actually manage things like change and uncertainty so much more effectively.
So good. There's been this, I guess, craze as it pertains to, and it's not crazy, it's definitely something that is necessary, but mental health or mental wellness. As a mind expert, as a mental health advocate, how do we scientifically define mental illness? Because many of us think it's only schizophrenia or it's bipolar disorder or something extreme. How do you define it as a scientist?
Okay, I'm so pleased you asked that question. And I do explain this, what I'm about to answer. I do explain it very, very clearly in this book, because the narrative that we've been told has made it very scary and created a huge stigma around mental health. So mental illness is not how it's defined currently. Mental illness is not an illness. It's not an illness like cardiovascular disease or heart disease, which is cardiovascular, or an immune system disorder or a brain disorder. It is a response to a situation. So what we need to do is completely change our narrative. When we talk about mental health and mental illness, we have got to throw out everything that we've heard and come back to the fact that if you're human, you're going to experience life, and some experiences in your life are going to be very adverse, and you're going to have a response to that with your mind, like I've been explaining. You'll think, feel, choose through that, and you will build a trauma response into your brain because your brain's trying to survive. If you just talk about racism, I mean, that has generationally changed how people function and operate. I mean, just the other day, my one of my family members, the police came to their door. Because it was pretty much a racist. Her husband is black, and pretty much a racist attack. And they just assumed that there was screaming in the apartment block, and they just assumed that because that was a black man in there, this is trauma. This is shocking. It's terrible that actually happened. So this is this life mental. Let's to come back to what you were asking in terms of mental health. We've got to see that we as humans are in life and we experience good and bad stuff, and we respond to that. And if it's good stuff, we build a mentally healthy thought response. But if it's a toxic experience, like COVID and all these different scary things that can happen, we'll build a toxic response. This is not, the brain is wired for love. The mind is wired for optimism. And both of those lead to survival. We designed for survival. So therefore, we reject this, and this creates brain damage, and we will have a response to it. So it's not an illness; it is a response. So when we have words like depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and psychotic breaks and bipolar and those scary big words, which we've been told are illnesses, they're not illnesses. They're not it's. They're not these defined things like heart disease, which is you can define heart disease. You can describe it, you can diagnose it, you can test for it, you can medicate it, you can do surgery for it. Diabetes is a problem with insulin, diabetes type 2 or diabetes type 1. It's very specific. That biomedical model is very specific and clear. But when it comes to mind, it's not so clear. If two people are depressed, let's say you and I both are feeling depressed and we go to the doctor, they will tell us you have clinical depression if after the 10-minute little checklist. I mean, 10 minutes, they will diagnose you with clinical depression and recommend a medication. And you could just be you've just been maybe going through a major crisis in your marriage or in your business or something like that. And I've got some other story. Does that, so to say you and me both have clinical depression, I mean, just giving this as a dumb example, it's so wrong because it's not the same. We don't have this blocked artery. We have both had an experience, and that experience is what we've responded to, and depression is how we feel in response. So depression is not an illness. Bipolar is not an illness. Schizophrenia is not an illness. Anxiety is not an illness. What are they? They are responses to an underlying cause. They are symptoms of an underlying cause. They are warning signals of an underlying cause. So if we embrace them and say, okay, scary as they feel, and you say, embrace means to bring into your fold. It means something positive. If you say, okay, I'm not scared of those. I know they're kind of scary, but I'm going to embrace them because they are messengers. They are symptoms of something going on. I'm not crazy and then I'm not mentally ill. I don't have a neuropsychiatric brain disease. Sure, your brain will be affected by the depression. We will see from my neuroscientific research, I can show you if someone's depressed, the energy in the front of the brain will be asymmetrical and won't be balanced, and it will be low energy and not enough blood flow, and that will make you impulsive and all kinds of stuff. But that's not the cause, that's the response. Okay, that's because the mind moves through the brain. The thing is that you have a narrative, you have a context, you have an experience that you are living and going through. And as you experience that experience, you're thinking, feeling, and choosing. It's moving through your brain. Your brain is responding. You build, it's a scary experience. You build this. This is going to create a symptom of depression or anxiety. So symptoms, so depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, which is extreme psychotic breaks, disassociation, where the mind is like trying to cope. So it's extreme. Those are all warning signals or symptoms that you embrace and say, okay, what are you telling me? What's the message? And you can be crying and freaking out and you're feeling awful, but the only way out is through. So you've got to embrace it. And then when you embrace the warning signals, which is what the tree is emanating, the thought tree, you can then look at your behaviors and emotions, which will tell you more. Okay, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm feeling this and I'm feeling that. And when I do this, then that tells you, oh, my perspective of life, my tree trunk, my perspective of life is like life sucks. It's just terrible. Why? Why am I thinking this? What has happened? Ask, answer, discuss. And then you can start finding the root. As you experience them, let's say that you walk into school and you're constantly bullied by a group of people at school because maybe whatever, okay? And that's the seed that is sown. Immediately that seed grows roots and it grows a plant. So there's the bullying, that's the root. And then next day bullying, more bullying. But it's grown a root. At first, within the instance of bullying, you grow roots, you grow the little branch, the tree trunk, and you grow the little branches. Then the next day, more bullying, more roots, more stronger tree trunk, more branches, and so it goes on. So you have this toxic adverse circumstance, and that's in you. Now that then the child then becomes depressed. Then the child's not working. The child's scared to listen at school. The child's now developed fear. These are all responses. It's not that your child now has ADD and your child now has depression, and you've now got to give them a psychiatric drug which will change how the brain functions and add to the problem. What we have to do is say, why is the child depressed? Why is my child suddenly withdrawing? Why is my child suddenly having these behaviors? And then dig down to the behaviors, the emotional behaviors, and then you find the root of the issue. And then when you embrace that, you weaken it. So what we see from neuroscience is that when we embrace and we process and we reconceptualize in this way, as soon as we embrace something, we bring it into the light. As soon as this thought is in the light, you can see I'm kind of trying to shake it. It becomes weakened. So it physically weakens. When something's weakened, what can we do? It can be changed. So there's a positive aspect of change. Change is such a positive thing. I now have power over this. By me saying, yes, I feel depressed because every day when I go to school, these kids are bullying me, and then they tease me at school and then we work through it and we work out a way. As soon as I do that, you shifted the power. You've now can change that. You can start reconceptualizing. You can start dealing with that. And let's say you've gone into adulthood and you never dealt with that. You literally have to go back to that stage of you were 7 when you were bullied or whatever. I'm just making something up, or you were abused at 6 or something like that. You literally have to go back as an adult to that and help to reconceptualize that. And that takes the work. So mental illness is not then this stigma that only happens to some people, which is currently what we're told. We hear these statistics that 70% of people are suffering this. 100% of people are battling with mental health. If you're human, you are battling with your mental health because you are experiencing at the moment. They say there's a pandemic in mental health. Duh, as I'd say, I mean, of course. Why? Because we're facing a crisis in our world. That's an adverse. We're having a normal reaction. So to feel depressed or anxious or scared or fearful now doesn't mean you're mentally ill. That's just going to make it worse. It means you're having a normal response to a scary situation. So you have to acknowledge that. You have to embrace it. You have to process. And that's what the Neurocycle is. That's what the 5 steps of the Neurocycle are. How do I get my mind under control to be able to embrace that thing so I can work through the bullying with my child, that I can work through the fear I have of getting COVID, or work through the trauma of losing a loved one, or getting sick, or being in hospital, or whatever it is that you're facing. We are human. So therefore, mental health is going to affect every single one of us. So the last thing maybe that'll help to sort of cement what I've said is that if you think of life being a continuum, in the middle there's a 0, and this is 1 to 10, and that's -1 to -10. Think of a 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, -1, 2, 3, 4, and think of a bell curve around that. In any one day, most of us are hovering around the -4 to +4. So you wake up and you've maybe had a bad night because you didn't sort out thoughts from the day before. So you had restless sleep and you had nightmares. So you wake up in a bit of a mood. So you wake up in a -4. And then you get this text from your boss and it's like really putting you under pressure. So you'd slip to -5. And then you get up and you have an argument with your spouse. Now you're at -6. And then your kids are just like crazy and you have to homeschool or you whatever. And you've got to have a meeting and the dog's barking and it's just, and you're at -7. And then this great thing happens and you get this great message and you suddenly have got some business deal through and you have a meal with your spouse or your kids, and now you're +7 or +4. And so, we're moving up and down. Where things become just really chaotic and disordered and messy is when we start slipping down into the -5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And when we hit those levels, that's when we have the psychotic breaks and the extreme mood swings, which they'll describe as bipolar and schizophrenia and dissociation, all those psychological terms, which are excellent terms, but they're descriptions. They're not illnesses. They're descriptions of a state that you're in because your mind and body are trying to cope with a situation. So in that moment, disassociation is your coping mechanism for survival. May not be the best thing and sustainable, but in that moment, that's what you need to do to cope, to survive. And then with the help of support of therapy and family and loved ones, you can then get through that state and find the root cause and do this whole embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing in therapy and on your own, because we've got to be able to manage our mind between. If you're going for therapy, for example, you go maybe once or twice a week. What do you do the other 6 days of the week? What are you doing 24 hours a day? You have to manage your mind. So we see from the scientific research, which I've done over these 38 years and which I've put in the book, is that you can manage your mind every 10 seconds. You actually, your conscious mind has veto power. We are able to stand back and observe our own thinking, feeling, and choosing. And when we do that, we access the inner wisdom, and then we can start seeing, oh, geez, I responded so badly in that way. And you start seeing, oh, I shouldn't have said it like this. Oh, that's why my colleague reacted, or my husband reacted, or my wife reacted, because I used this tone, this body language. I was kind of aggressive. I looked at them through the lens of how they used to respond. In other words, when we become more self-regulated, we can manage the moment by moment. And that's what I teach you with the Neurocycle. And you can also see if you consistently have a pattern, there's obviously a reason why. We never do anything for no reason. So there's a consistent toxic pattern in your life. You need to go do a 63-day Neurocycle where you start doing the work daily of saying, why is there this pattern? What is the trigger? What are the emotional warning signals? What are the behaviors? What's the perspective? What's the root? And you do that work. So that's in a nutshell what mental health is. So we take mental health out of that scary sphere and we put it into, hey, I need a Neurocycle. I can do this. It's okay. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be anxious. Embrace it. Now find out why. And let's do the work of why. So there's in a nutshell.
Ooh, I love it. So good. I have to ask, and this is something, as you were talking, talked about experiencing life and having those fruitful, flourishing trees and then the toxic tree. We've all, and I'm sure someone listening has known or knows someone who's in something that we perceive toxic, like maybe it's a relationship and it's abuse, but it's like normal for them. What has happened, let's say, to this young lady or a female who is in a relationship where it's clearly not love or clearly not someone who is caring for them, but they've become okay with it? What has happened in that individual's mind?
Well, that's a big question, because first of all, that person, we tend to adapt and we can often deceive ourselves. So in that situation, I mean, there's so many reasons, and I'm hesitating to answer, because if it's a toxic, abusive relationship, sometimes in a narcissistic type of relationship where the person who's abusing the other person, whether it's emotionally or physically, that's coming from their own toxic trauma, and they're using that other person to almost suppress their own trauma and to try and make themselves feel better. And it's important that what we do as humans is that we become self-regulated. So in terms of what do, you need to look at yourself. You can't fix someone else. You can't live someone else's life. And even if you're married to them or you're in a relationship with them, you aren't responsible for fixing them. That's something we have to recognize. And it's something that the church, I think, sometimes crosses that line a lot, where they think, okay, I'm going to fix you. This is why I say the scripture, do this, cast out. It isn't how, even what, if you really read the Bible and look at science, because science and scripture are very aligned, that's not really what we should be doing. You can't fix anyone. You can only fix yourself. You can only support other people. So in a situation like that, the person who's in that situation may be so scared that they don't want to face the truth. So therefore, maybe a loving support outside system needs to say, hey, are you comfortable being treated that way? Are you comfortable being spoken to like that, or having to live in this kind of environment? And they have to get to the point where they are ready to face that and actually say, okay, no, I'm actually really depressed. I'm really anxious. I'm doing this and this, I'm withdrawing, I'm whatever. But someone may have to lovingly point that out to them. But that person then has to say, okay, I'm not comfortable. Why? And they have to do the hard work of gathering awareness, of reflecting, of working through the writing, visualizing, getting to the point where you recheck the 5 steps of the Neurocycle. You need to go through that process of me. I need to look at myself. Am I happy in this situation? And if I'm not, then I need to find out why, what's happening. And no one needs to be abused by anyone else. If you're in an abusive relationship and it's making you threatened physically, obviously get out of there. And if it's an emotional abuse, it's the same thing. You don't need to be there. You need to try, if possible, remove yourself from the situation. People can get stuck into situations where they are so abused that they are frightened, that if they leave, that they won't be looked after, or they won't have a home. There's all those practical things to consider. So depending on how extreme the situation is, if you know someone who's in that situation, they need protection. You need to help get them out of that dangerous situation. If it's one where it's not physical abuse, it's emotional abuse, that's also pretty bad. I mean, they also need help to maybe come and live with me for a few weeks until you can get yourself in a state of mind where you can actually see what's happening, because sometimes you can't always see what's happening when you're in the situation. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because I was curious if you could be in a situation so long to where your mind is so used to it that it's just the normal, and it's
yes, we do
for
adapt.
You the way it's supposed to be.
You do adapt. It's like a child who goes through continual sexual abuse. They know that that's because we know that it's not how we wired. But a child as young as 2 or 3, they know instinctively that that's wrong, but they don't know how to process it. And if it happens all the time, there's that weird relationship that can happen. Because that's so often the story with sexual abuse, that it will be repeated by, sometimes it'll be years before it's actually found out that it's happening. And that and even though the child, they're the victim, the perpetrator is the wrong person, but they have this control over them that the person almost adapts. Now that's an extreme situation. Then eventually one day somehow they get away from it, and then they realize that that's not the normal. Or a child who grows up with a parent who's constantly shouting at them, or shouting at a mother or father, and fights, or yes, people, it's wrong, but to protect yourself, something's wrong. But the younger you are, the more difficult it is to verbalize. And where do you go when you're a child? That's your protector. So there's almost like a coping, a weird kind of, not even weird, it's a reordering that occurs in the mind and the brain just to survive. So you go into survival mode, and then one day it kind of will hit you because you can't live in that. And maybe one day you get set free, and then you see another relationship and you say, oh gosh, that wasn't the normal. And those are extreme situations. Sometimes it could just be a mother who is loving, or a father who is loving, or a boss who is kind, but there's a manipulation, that subtle manipulation that happens over time. And it's so subtle that you get used to it. So you can adapt. You can get used to if the same thing is experienced a lot, you do get used to it. But if you really self-regulate, if you and your mind is malleable, and our brain is changeable. This is the change thing again. It's a gift. Because of change, we can change how our mind functions. So we can train ourselves to become aware of our discomforts and find out the reason for our discomforting signals and our slightly maybe crazy behaviors or behaviors. We can tune in to our discomforts in our physical and emotional states to find out why. And we can train ourselves to do that. It's a skill. Neurocycling, which is learn to manage your mind. It's a skill that you can develop. And sometimes it does take a prompt from the outside to say to someone, maybe you should that's not like, I don't think that's the norm. It's not like that in our home. So sometimes it does take a gentle prod from the outside to help someone to step into that zone and to be able to change how they are functioning in that environment.
So good. On page 66, you talk about the pathway to empowerment. And I thought this was so interesting. Delve into that just a little bit, just to give our listeners a little insight on what exactly that is.
So what I put into the book is a summary of my clinical trial. And what I looked at in my clinical trial was, if you manage your mind in all the ways that I've been seeing, how does that change your behaviors, your life? Can you get things like depression and anxiety under control? Can you do all this stuff? Can you find the signals and reconceptualize it? Can you see those narcissistic patterns and that you've been manipulated by and get out of it? Can you find that trauma and reconceptualize it? In other words, all the things I've been speaking about, what I did in my clinical trial was I had what we call the gold standard. I did a random controlled trial where we had a control group and an experimental group, all statistically done with statistics, etc. And I make, as I said, it's summarized simplistically in the book. And I do have sections in the book where I explain the sciencey stuff, but then I say, what does this mean for you? So you can skip the hard stuff and just get to the point. So the point of the empowerment is that what we found was that the subjects in the experimental group, they were taught the Neurocycle. The Neurocycle, the second half of the book, is the Neurocycle. The Neurocycle is the 5 scientific steps that I've developed over 38 years of clinical research and clinical applications. So with real people in the field, like I mentioned in the beginning, that are how you use your conscious mind to access the wisdom of your unconscious mind, to fix the mess in your mind and to change your brain and therefore your body. So the experimental group got the Neurocycle, the control group didn't. All of them came in and they were evaluated psychologically. We heard their narrative. The most important thing is what is their story? What's the context that I also spoke about earlier on? So we don't just look at people from a measurement. We look at who are you? What have you gone through? What's happening in your life? Why are you feeling depressed or anxious? Why did you enter into the study? So we got their story. We also did various psychological measures. And I have one psychological measure that really looks at a person's ability to be empowered, at how they're self-regulating, how they're thinking about their thinking. And it's a very powerful tool because it enables you to see your non-conscious mind and your body know the truth before you're consciously aware of it. And that particular tool will pick up that level of truth. So we did that. We also looked at people's DNA. We looked at their blood, their cortisol, their homocysteine, all different blood measures. And we looked inside the brain. And we did it at various different time points over 9 weeks. A very, very controlled trial. So essentially, the pathway to empowerment was that we did all this testing on the experimental group, and they got the Neurocycle, and the control group got all the testing, but no Neurocycle. So no way of managing it. Both groups became very aware of their issues because the testing, you tell me your story, you're going to be aware of it. You tell me what's going on in your life. We do blood work. We see things in your brain. You made aware of it. So both groups were very aware of the stuff going on in their life. The one group then knew how to manage it. They were given the tools to, okay, this is why I'm depressed. So it's not that I am depression. I am depressed because of, or I am anxious because of, and this is what I'm going to do. And they were empowered. They received this skill, the mind skill, to manage their mind. So instead of just, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed with anxiety, I don't know what to do, and getting more anxious, they actually said, oh, okay, I'm anxious. Why? And they started finding out that Neurocycle helped them to find the signals, the behaviors, the emotions, the perspective, the roots over the 63 days. So they entered into they were empowered. They went into a path of empowerment where they were able to feel the autonomy or the independence to recognize, if I embrace this, I'm going to be able to dismantle this. I'm going to be able to reconceptualize this. I'm going to embrace this, to process, to reconceptualize and make it into something else. And that, we saw their cortisol level drops. We saw their inflammation in their brain and body drop. We saw their DNA change. I mean, for example, your DNA is, if you take your DNA, you can pull out a chromosome. Chromosomes look like little X's, and chromosomes have telomeres on the end, which are my fingernails, just to give you an analogy. Your fingernails, which are telomeres, are a proxy for how you're managing your mind and stress and emotions. So if you're very stressed out and toxic and not managing your stress and just like not dealing with trauma and suppressing everything and angry and all that stuff, your telomeres shorten. They don't do very well. They're very involved in cell division. You make millions of cells every second, and those cells build your organs and your systems and everything. You keep on replacing that. So if you're constantly toxic, you don't have very good cell replacement. So your body starts getting aged and sick and vulnerable. And so what we saw was that some of our subjects in the control group and the experimental group at the beginning of the study, the chronological age, which is how old they were actually in years, so maybe 30 years or 40 years or 70 years old, but their body age was much older. So we had like 35-year-olds that had 65-year-old bodies. And through the Neurocycle, they went through a pathway of empowerment where they were able to strengthen the telomeres so that their chronological ages and their body ages caught up. So in other words, their body got healthier. So instead of having a 65-year-old sick body at 35, by the end of the 9 weeks, they had a 35-year-old body and they were 35. I mean, that's how powerful this is. Within 9 weeks, they changed the entire bodily system. And so there were significant changes. Like we saw cortisol, which we all know is related to the stress system. And when cortisol's up, it means your glucose levels are spiking. It means your body's inflamed. It means you're at risk for heart disease, brain disease, immune system dysfunction. Even getting the COVID vaccine will not work as well in your body if your mind is so flared up that you've got telomeres that aren't strong enough and your immune system's not functioning. But through mind management, you can get your body strong for a vaccine, literally, for fighting off illnesses, for fighting illnesses. So in other words, it's not just nice to have. It's not, mental health is totally intertwined in our physical nature because we use our mind through we express our mind through our brain and our body. So the pathway to empowerment was helping people to recognize, I can stand back and observe my own thinking. I am empowered to be able to do that. And as I do that, I can then, that independence gives me the strength to look at the toxic thought, to look at the toxic stress, to see challenges and barriers as opportunities, to have a mindset of change that says, oh, okay, I'm open to possibilities. I'm open to change. I embrace it. I'll go with the flow. I won't see that as a failure. I'll learn the lessons. That barrier is it's not something bad. It's actually an opportunity. And that's what we saw happening in the 9 weeks. And if I can bring that to an analogy that everyone this will land the whole, everything I've said, this will land the whole plane, land the whole story. Think of Jesus in the garden. You know, if you think of, we have the perfect model of mental health in the whole Gethsemane experience. There's so much more that mental health is totally explained in this experience. And I'll quickly say it. Jesus shows us by going into the garden that we have to embrace the hard stuff. Jesus wasn't going in the garden to plant plants and have a fun time. Jesus was going in the garden to face a terrible, terrible, painful experience. And Jesus knew that the only way out was through. Jesus had to get in the garden. Jesus sweated blood, knowing what was coming up. So the physiological response in the body to the stress in the mind is demonstrated scientifically in the garden by Jesus sweating blood, which means that the mental experience, the mind of knowing what was coming up and going through the experience of all the trauma and being human, the scariness of all the things that can happen. Jesus had a physiological response where blood vessels were bursting, where his body was responding because of the mind-brain connection. So Jesus demonstrates, hey, if you're going to go through stuff, you're going to have to get in the garden. Jesus never shoved it under the door. He never asked for Prozac to numb his pain. He didn't ask for the disciples to take him out of there. Jesus went in the garden. And we, in our current mental health approach, even in the church, I'm sorry to say it is slap on a Band-Aid of say a scripture, use God as a genie, use scripture as a magic potion. It's not like that. Jesus sweated blood. Jesus was on his knees. How many of us are prepared to go through that. And it got worse. Once Jesus was in the garden for a few hours sweating blood, then Jesus got whipped and shredded. His body was shredded, and then Jesus was nailed. So you know the story. So it gets worse before it gets better. So, and that's what people are so scared of. We've become so scared of facing it. As soon as I feel any depression or any anxiety, off to the doctor, get the brain altering psychoactive drug, because that's what those psychiatric drugs do. They are psychoactive. They are not remediating an underlying illness. There's no illness in your brain that those drugs are chemically fixing. That's not the truth. That's just a marketing ploy to sell the drug. Those drugs are psychoactive. They are changing how the brain functions. And part of that is an anesthetizing effect, which people say, oh, I feel much better on an antidepressant. That's only because you're not facing your stuff. That's not what Jesus told you to do. Jesus said it's going to be painful. You're not supposed to anesthetize your pain. You're supposed to go through it, because then it will get worse before it gets better, which is known as the treatment effect. And I show this in my research. I show that at 21 days, you'll have these gamma peaks in your brain, which basically means that there's change happening, but that change brings with it tremendous awareness. So when you do trauma therapy and you start seeing your traumas from things that you had suppressed for so many years, it is so scary. So you need a support system. So what did Jesus do? Jesus had the disciples in the garden with him, but they went to sleep. So you're not any help if you're asleep. He didn't wake them up and said, get me out of here, or give me some Prozac. Jesus said, can you but be with me for but an hour? So we need each other, not to fix each other, but to support each other. I don't know what you're going through, because your experience is your experience. You are the authority on your experience, but I can be with you. I can be by your side. I can hold your hand. I can listen. I can do neurocycles with you. I can go with you to therapy. I can sit with you when you're crying. I can be there if you need to text me. That's what Jesus was demonstrating, that we must do this with supporting you. They could not get in the garden and do what Jesus was doing. Jesus could not get out the garden and do what they were doing. I can't do what you've got to do. I can't carry your ring, if you want to use the Lord of the Rings analogy, which is another phenomenal film to understand this concept, which is I use all the time. Frodo had to carry the ring, and Frodo had to throw that ring into the volcano. Sam couldn't, but Sam could carry him. And so that famous scene where Frodo says he can't go on, and Sam says, I can't carry your ring, but I can carry you. That's what Jesus demonstrates. Then Jesus gets on the cross. It's even worse. It's just getting worse. But then Jesus rises again with the wounds in his hand. So we will get through it. And when you're in it, it doesn't feel like it, but we have to hang on to the fact that there's the model of mental health. The model of mental health is to go through, is to talk about it, to be open. Leaders, everyone, we are all battling. We need to be honest and open and vulnerable. And that's what I teach in my book. That's what I teach on my podcast, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. That's what I teach on. I'm open about what I'm going through, things I go through in my own life. No one's exempt. If you're human, you're not exempt from having challenges. And here I am offering a way for us to access the wisdom to manage those challenges with people.
So good. So good. My goodness. Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, 5 simple scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking. Available today by Dr. Caroline Leaf. I encourage you to go pick it up, get your copy, study it, read it, share it with your family. Dr. Caroline, before we jump off, give us a couple of just practical things that we can implement to help us, I guess, start the cleaning process that will consciously put us in a better state.
The first thing that I would say is to actually to train yourself to self-regulate. Self-regulation is absolutely vital. So self-regulation is the awareness. A simple way to train yourself to be aware of your mind is to. So let me step back. Self-regulation is what we need to do. How do we do it? Number one, understand what I've been saying today. The mind is not the brain. The mind is how you think, feel, and choose. So to get yourself to self-regulate, you need to understand mind is separate from brain. Mind moves through brain, brain responds. How can you be aware of your mind? Well, you can do this simple exercise now. It's called the multiple perspective advantage. Stand back now and observe your own thinking. So mentally in your own mind, stand back and observe how you are thinking, feeling, and choosing in this moment as you're listening to me. What are you thinking? How are you thinking that? What are the thoughts going through your mind? What's the impact? Like I'm now watching my hands. I'm watching your face respond to me. I'm aware of my body movements. I'm aware of my tone of my voice. I'm very aware of the choice of words that I'm making. I'm really intensely involved in trying to answer this in the most effective way. So I am observing. I'm almost like out of my body, having an out-of-body experience, and I am regulating my thinking, feeling, and choosing. So that's a phenomenal skill to develop. It's at the core of what I teach. And I teach it. This is exactly what I've just described is in the book. And that self-regulation will improve as you do the 5 steps of the Neurocycle. The Neurocycle is all about self-regulation. And there may be a last closing sort of a statement to hang on to, is that we cannot control the events and circumstances of life, which I mentioned earlier on, but we can control our responses. We can learn to become responders and not reactors. And it starts with self-regulation. And you can start training self-regulation. It's a skill that you can learn and develop by doing this multiple perspective advantage. And then all the rest you can get from the book.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. And Dr. Caroline, I especially appreciate you for joining us. Tell us where we can get the book and how we can learn the podcast and stay in touch with what you're doing.
Thank you. The book you can get wherever books are available. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can even just go to cleaningupyourmentalmess.com, and then they'll take you to all the links, and you can find where you want. You can get the book all over the place. And then also my webpage, drleaf.com, and then my Instagram handle is drcarolineleaf. You'll find me every day. I put up posts about all these concepts to help you manage your mind.
Well, Dr. Caroline, I appreciate you. This is Women's History Month, and you are truly a woman who is a history maker.
Thank you.
My best to you. Tell Mac
you.
Hello for me.
I will do.
I love how he just holds you down and makes sure that everything's perfect for you.
I know. He's amazing. He really does do that.
Absolutely amazing. Well, Dr. Caroline, you have an amazing rest of your week, and
Thank you so much.
Sure to stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Well, this has been the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. I'm your host, Cornell Jermaine. Until next time, let your soul be made whole. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Build on Beauty podcast. For more information about our host, please visit cornelljermaine.com.